I'm Jane Mardram, and I am a Pearson Subject Specialist work event. So today we're going to briefly just remind ourselves about the coursework requirements. We will be looking at planning and preparation, supporting your students, the debate, the different interpretations, wider reasoning, and at the end, thinking about the amount of Pearson support that is available to you. So this afternoon, hopefully we'll refresh your understanding of the coursework requirements, and then we'll consider how to prepare to deliver the component and discuss ways to support students effectively. And an important part of this network event is sharing ideas about good teaching practice. So I will be encouraging you to share ideas that have worked for you into chat for everybody else to see. And at the very end, there'll be a chance as well to compare what topics you are doing and seeing if there are other schools out there who would like to share ideas and resources with you. So let's begin then with that refresh of the coursework requirements. Coursework making up 20% of the assessment. And of course, we are looking at two assessment objectives, which we'll be looking at today. Assessment objective 1 is 5%, and then assessment objective 3. So students will be building on the work that they've already completed for paper 1. And so they will be familiar with the process of analysis of passages of writing by historians. And we'll be looking today at how to build on that understanding. While we're talking about the paper 1, I would recommend the paper 1 network pack from 2020 for more information and teaching ideas on tackling the section C, historical interpretations. So there you have on the screen the generic question. Historians have disagreed about. What is your view about, with those reference to the 3 chosen works, analysing the ways in which the interpretations of the question, problem or issue differ, explaining the differences, and evaluating the arguments, indicating which you found most persuasive in explaining judgment. So we'll be looking at those points together. So students are required to investigate a historical problem, historical question, or issue to view based on relevant reading of the topic. They are to analyse, explain, and evaluate the interpretations of 3 historians on the topic and produce a written assignment of 3,000 to 4,000 words, which includes a bibliography, and references for quotations and citations. They are to analyse, explain, and evaluate the interpretations in the 3 chosen works and reach an overall judgment on the view, making use of supplementary reading. We'll be talking about that later as well. By the way, the generic question that I showed you is also in your booklet, page 3. And this is a good moment just to say, please have the delegate booklet available. If you can, you print it out, otherwise have it available on the screen, as we will be referring to it as we go through. Any problems finding those resources, just put it into chat, and I think that a link has been put into chat as to how to get those resources, the delegate booklet. So here is the mark scheme, showing the 5 bullet points. Give you a moment just to refresh your memory of that mark scheme. And we're going to take bullet point 4, evaluation of and judgment on historians' arguments, as an example to work through to show how there is a progression through the levels. And this, of course, is a useful task students, helping them to understand how the levels show a progression in each of these 5 bullet points. So if we look at bullet point 4 through the levels, you'll see I've put key words in red there. It's information rather than argument, questionable assumptions. Level 2, they are recognising there's an element of argument, but the criteria for judgment is routine, just implicit, not explicit, and they've got limited substantiation. By the time we get to level 3, attempts are made to establish criteria for some of the arguments in the chosen work, but there is weak substantiation. Level 4, valid criteria established in order to judge those 3 chosen works, and that criteria is applied in the process of making judgments, but still only partly substantiated. But by level 5, you've got the valid criteria established to judge the 3 chosen works. They're applied and they're fully justified in the process of making judgments. So that's me showing a progression through bullet point 4. Could you take another bullet point and just give you a couple of minutes to similarly compare it through the levels, underlining what you think are the key moments of progression through the levels? You will find the mark scheme in your delegate booklet. It's on pages 4 to 6. And as I say, this is a useful class exercise to help students understand the mark scheme and then to chart their own progress. The booklet, page 4 to 6, looking at the mark scheme, choosing one other bullet point, looking through the levels, underlining the key differences in order to see how you can progress through the levels. Also in your booklet, you have an exemplar, which is at the back of the booklet in full. We'll be taking some extracts from it as we go through, but the whole thing is available to you at the end. So what I'd like you to do, please, is just to read part of it. If you could read the introduction, the conclusion. There is a section on the historian Fourier, which is on pages 2 to 3. Those are the pages of the script itself. The actual pages in the booklet that you have are pages 14 to 15 and page 19. Just have a look at that, please, and decide what level would you give this exemplar and what mark out of 40. I'll give you some time just to read those sections. Obviously, it's there for you to read in full later, but we only have time to look at some sections today. So have a look and decide what level and what mark would you give it. The booklet, Khalil, you'll find in the resources tab. It's called the delegate booklet, as far as I'm aware. The second document, Mark, thank you, Mark. The second document in the resources is the booklet. Pages 14 to 15 and 19 of the booklet. I'm just giving you a few more minutes to read just those sections: the introduction, conclusion, the Fury section, and part of the reason for differences. And you'll see in chat that there is a link for you if you're not able to get it through the resources tab, or there is an email you could use in order to get the booklet, the second of the two documents in the resources tab. Jacobs, I see that 2 people have entered the waiting room. If you could admit them, please. Thank you. For those who have just entered, we are looking at the exemplar at the end of the booklet. If you look onto chat, you will see how to access the booklet. Hopefully you'll get it from the resources tab. They're reading the introduction, conclusion, Fury section, pages 2 to 3, which is actually pages 14 to 15 of the booklet, and the part of the reasons for difference. So just another couple of minutes and then see, we'll go through together. And you've been asked, what level or mark would you give it? So this exemplar was at the very top of level 5, and it was 40 out of 40. It was a firm level 5. And then going through the bullet points, in bullet point 1, there is a range of relevant material identified from their reading, which is appropriately cited, and it's deployed with precision, demonstrating a clear understanding of the issue under debate, which reaches it to a firm level 5. In bullet point 2, there is sustained judgment, which is integrated into discussion throughout. In bullet point 3, there's analysis of the 3 chosen works and the differences between them, and explanation of the basis of the author's arguments. And actually, if you look at the start of some of those paragraphs, you will see evidence of that. And here is one example. Shapiro takes quite a different approach to this, while he still argues that the rise of extremist groups set up the conditions to which the constitutional monarchy fell. He explains their rise through his theory of dramatic politics. So actually, if you look at the start of some of those paragraphs, you will see clearly how there is analysis of the chosen works and the differences between them. Bullet point 4, valid criteria are established and justified. And bullet point 5, knowledge is deployed to show understanding of the conceptual focus, and it is concise, well organized, logical and coherent. So it's a clear level 5 in all of those bullet points. And we will be looking at this exemplar in more detail later. I do suggest giving students exemplars to identify the levels and become familiar with the requirements. There is a whole bank of exemplars at a range of levels available on the Edexcel website. There is going to be a new coursework guide being launched next week, so do look out for that. And at the back of that coursework guide, in Appendix 2, that all of these exemplars will be listed, so that will be useful for you. So just to return then to the level 5 of the mark scheme, and you can see from there how that exemplar is covering the aspects of level 5 that I've talked about and again have highlighted here. Just one thing to note, that if they are over the word count, remember the word count was 3,000 to 4,000 words, then they are not fulfilling bullet point 5's clarity and precision, which is in that final bullet point there. Look at level 5, clarity and precision. So I hope that's helped refresh you on the requirements of the coursework and of the mark scheme itself. And as I say, we will be returning to this level 5 40 out of 40 exemplar as we go through, and it's in full at the back of the booklet for you to look at later. So let's now move on to preparing to deliver. So first of all, planning. What topic? Well, there is a freedom to choose a topic that I'd like to cover, as long as it is sufficiently complex and interesting enough to have a disagreement between historians. Remember that generic question historians have disagreed about. They could choose a new area of history that is of interest, or they may be looking in more depth at an issue covered in one of the other 3 units. But they mustn't duplicate coverage of the historical interpretation section studied for paper 1. What question? Well, it could include debates on the 5 historical concepts that they're already familiar with through papers 1, 2, and 3: change, continuity, causation, consequence, similarity and difference, significance, or key features of societies and periods. And it's up to the centre to decide whether the students will use the same assignment title or whether they'll have different titles. I wonder if in chat you could indicate, what do you do? Do you use the same title for your cohort, or do your students choose different titles? It'd be good to have a quick snapshot and see what you are doing. Both options are permitted within the specification. This guidance comes from the specification, but will also be in the new Pearson A-level history coursework guidance that will be launched next week. So as I say, keep a lookout for that. So great, just put some things into chat. It would be good to compare to see who has a choice, who does the same. Thank you. And of course, what's important when they're choosing a topic is to check that there are enough published resources available for students to exercise individual judgment. And more on that a bit later. So taken from the Pearson A-level history coursework guidance again, the students are encouraged to have a short skills-based course of study. And I would encourage you to plan carefully their short skills-based course. And it can be building, of course, on the work done for paper 1, section C. It does have an important role in preparing their students for independent research. So the sorts of things you'd be including in that short course will be the range of methods used by historians in their work, the diverse range of focuses and purposes that historians have, and the different perspectives of historians. As well, of course, developing their inquiry skills, effective record keeping and referencing, planning skills, and effective use of a library and the internet. As well as this, if the topic chosen for the coursework is different to the topics covered in the other 3 assessment components, papers 1 to 3, it would also be permissible to deliver a short course to provide students with a contextual background. You can see here I've put a question mark of white, gold, or blue, black. And I wonder if you remember this. It went viral in February 2015, so you can easily Google it. That could be a fun, non-historical way to introduce to students the idea of different perspectives. Which leads us on to thinking about what is historical interpretation and getting students to think about that in that short taught course and as they're doing their coursework. Asking students for their thoughts on why there isn't just one answer to their coursework question. And I like this from E.H. Carr's What is History, that classic, which comes from his George Macaulay Trevelyan lectures delivered actually in 1961, but still such a useful image. The facts are really not at all like fish on the fishmonger's slab. They are like fish swimming about in a vast and sometimes inaccessible ocean. And what the historian catches will depend partly on chance, but mainly on what part of the ocean he chooses to fish in and what tackle he chooses to use. These two factors being, of course, determined by the kind of fish he wants to catch. By and large, the historian will get the kinds of facts he wants. History means interpretation. And I think that's quite a fun introduction to get students thinking about what is historical interpretation. And also, there is now another book you might be interested in. I don't know if you've seen it, which is called What is History Now? And this book has a prologue that might well be worth sharing with students to read and then debate with them in class. And it's an update of Carr's book. It's got a range of contemporary academics and non-academics writing about some of the ways in which people explore the past. And interestingly, one of the editors is E.H. Carr's granddaughter. And in fact, the prologue also covers the recent statues debate and more broadly, the arguments about censorship, decolonizing the curriculum and rewriting the past. So a very useful book there. But actually, this could also encourage discussion on the centrality of interpretation to the study of history and the value of having a diverse range of voices. Here's just a few quotes from the prologue to show you. History is above all interpretation. That's why this volume hosts a multiplicity of voices. History is for everybody, inviting the reader to enter and share in the many ways in which history can be enjoyed and interpreted. So getting students to think about what is historical interpretation is a really good way into starting their coursework. Asking students why are there different interpretations could invoke a class discussion, adding their ideas onto the board. Arthur Chapman, in his abridged article, Developing Students' Understanding of Historical Interpretation, which is available on the Pearson website, says this: historical interpretations are constructions, things that historians actively make rather than simply find. I wonder if you could put into chat, what ideas do you have and would you share with your students as to why are there different interpretations? I'll give you a moment to put it into chat. This is the sort of thing you might ask your students to do. Have a think about why are there different interpretations. I'll give you a moment to put some things into chat. Great, we're getting some good ones here. Different research focus, different ideologies, differences in focus, purpose, background, motives. There's some great things here. I hope you do look at chat afterwards, and it's the sort of thing that we can actually do with our students very profitably. Thank you. Lots of really good examples there. Here are some of the ones that you can find in the Arthur Chapman article, which I think a lot you've covered here. They may be asking different questions. They may be selecting different types of evidence. They may be using different concepts or methods to make sense of the records they're examining. They might be influenced at the time when they're writing by different events. Yes, the historical context, as Abby says there. Thank you. We're getting some really good answers into chat. Do keep them coming. Here is a little exercise that you could do with students to encourage this discussion. Oh, before I do that, I've quite forgotten this really nice quote that comes from the book. Even the decision to study some things and ignore others is an act of interpretation. And that's an interesting thing you could write on the board and get students to discuss. Actually, there's also a discussion about historical silence in the Carr and Lipscomb book that I was talking about. And it's something that historians are becoming more aware of as a counterpoint to historical significance. There is a link to Arthur's guidance on the website, and thank you, Mark has put that onto the chat for you. Here is another example from his book of an exercise you could do with the students to introduce them to the idea of interpretation. You could use a picture of a market square or a shopping centre near you. And then say that 2 researchers are counting how many people are in the market square, same day, same time, to judge its success. But they concluded significantly different numbers which affected their judgments, but neither was wrong. Asking students to think about why will really get them thinking about what we've just been talking about how historians make different choices. Any ideas why that you could put into chat? Why might they have different numbers even though it was the same day and time? Any thoughts? Aha, thank you, Laura. That's quick. Are they counting groups, children, individual? Those are shopping bags. Brilliant. All of this, really lovely. Different angle. Good point. Yeah, let's keep on getting the ideas in. There's some great ideas coming up. Looking out of a different window. Yep. So it might be same day, same place, but they might be looking at it from a different perspective like that. Yes. And are they lovely? Do they count the people eating at the cafe? No, absolutely. Are they counting just those in the market stalls or people going around the perimeter of the square? People inside the shops or just outside in the square? Are children included? As you said, people with shopping bags, only those buying things, and so on. I'm sure you'll find that your students have lots of ideas as well. And that's a really nice introduction into thinking about why people might come to different judgments. And then we could turn that into an historical example by having a look at this photograph, one of the earliest photographs of the Chartists attending Kennington Common on 10th of April 1848. And the historians have differed hugely in their ideas of how many people were there. Was it 15,000 or 300,000? You know, and thinking about, was it a failure or not? And so, of course, to count them, we'd have to define what is meant by Chartists, but we'd also have to make some decisions. Could you, again, put into chat what decisions have to be made by the historian, like very similar to the one we just did, but what the Chartists were, and for those of who don't know that period, were a 19th century working class movement wanting political reform and universal suffrage. Again, any ideas of what decisions have to be made as to how you're going to count and who you're going to include? Yes, thank you, Simon and Laura there. Who were they, supporters or just passing? How engaged people are? Yes, is it just the people who've got protest placards? What about those who are watching? Yeah, were women included as possible supporters? Good point. You know, and we know that whole families went to Kennington Common meeting. Do we include the whole family, the onlookers? Exactly, men or women? Yes, thank you. Lots of really good ideas coming in chat there. So these 2 exercises reinforce the idea that history is constructed, and it does depend on the historian's choices. Continuing thinking about why there are different interpretations, we could think of there being a diverse range of focus and purpose. Here's another task that you could do with the students. Provide a factual account with statistics and quotations of a historical event, and then give each group a different analytical task. And you'll see it's on the screen here. One group, just select the economic statistics and facts and write a judgment on its economic significance. Another group, just the quotations from and facts about people at the time to write about its social effect. Or select facts from the church, about the church to think about its religious significance. Or select the political speeches or decisions and write a judgment on its political significance. Factual handouts could be made from the short contextual course if you're giving that, or from an event learnt in previous topics studied. So have a range of economic, political and social facts available, and students are asked then to focus on just one aspect and use the relevant facts to form a judgment. And that will hopefully result in a discussion as the groups present their judgments in class, a discussion on how different methods or different focus or purpose can lead to different interpretations. Now, in your booklet is a mini example of just such an exercise. If you could have a look at page 8 of the booklet, you will see that there are 4 little extracts on the impact of the English Civil War. Have a little look and see if you can identify the focus in each of the 4 extracts. It won't take very long. It's just a little mini example of what you could do. I'll give you a minute to look at that. Page 8. The impact of the English Civil War. Can you see the different focuses in each of those extracts? And I think you'll soon see that number 1 was political, 2 was economic, 3 was social, and 4 was religious. And that's providing something like that with your groups can help them understand how historians can be focusing on some different aspect of the same event, but looking at different evidence in order to reach a different judgment. You could also ask them, what difference might a short or long-term focus on this event make to a judgment on its significance? I mean, going back to this example I've given you of the English Civil War, the immediate effect was that after the execution of King Charles I in 1649, England was a republic. And in December 1653, the army declared Cromwell Lord Protector. So you can see, looking at the immediate effect, would see quite a significant change. But if we look at the long term, Charles II was invited back to England to reclaim his throne in 1660, marking the restoration of the monarchy. Less significant. But then if you looked at even longer term, arguably the parliamentarians had laid the foundations for modern monarchy-government relations. So the significance of the event is therefore different depending on the short, long, or longer term focus. And that could be an interesting exercise to do with your students. Exercises such as these can help students understand how different interpretations are constructed. One thing you might like to do is to bring some either actual newspapers and periodicals into the classroom, or to provide online or copy some op-ed sections, as in it's op-ed stands for opposite editorial, looking at newspaper columns with opinion pieces from a range of different newspapers. And they can see how the columns can construct different arguments about the similar event or piece of news according to their political agendas and readership. That could be used, again, as an introduction to be thinking about why historians might have different agendas, scope, or focus. Hot seating might be a fun exercise to do with it. You could nominate 3 confident students to represent the 3 historians, and give each of those students an extract from their historian and a brief crib sheet on their historian's life. They then prepare a summary of their historian's argument and think, with your help, of possible reasons for their views. The rest of the class are given the same extracts, but not the crib sheet, and a reminder of the debate topic. And they prepare interview questions on the historian's views and their reasons for those views. After each historian has spoken, a class discussion on the merits of each historian's interpretation, followed by the students' own views, as well as their criteria for those views. That could be another interesting way to introduce interpretations. You could use paper one. As remember, any extracts given on the coursework topic cannot then be selected later by the students. So using paper one, or again, you could choose another historical question of which they would be familiar. An alternative exercise in groups of 3, representing the 3 historians, give each group a passage containing their historian's argument and to think about the reasons for their views, both from the passage itself, the focus, the evidence used, and from subsequent research that the groups do into the historians' lives and other works that they've written. And then share within the group and compare the different approaches before feeding it back to a whole class discussion. So I hope that that's given you some ideas of some of the ways in which you can get students talking and thinking about why do historians have different interpretations. Let's move on now to note-taking. What I'm showing you here is a suggestion, an A4 note-taking grid they could use in class. And again, they could use the paper one extracts. I would suggest that you start with the paper one extracts and then progress to using actual historians' chapters, which haven't been adapted to make them accessible as the paper one extracts have, as the next step. Again, a reminder, any extracts given on the coursework topic itself during this short course cannot then be selected. So it would be best to practice with other known topics. Now, all these ideas are just suggestions, and I'm hoping that you will be able to share what you do as well in the chat, so that we can share ideas on how we get students thinking about interpretations, and now how do we give them guidance in note-taking? Because in my experience, students do need guidance in class in identifying what is the main argument. Does the historian identify a main factor, trend, cause, significance, consequence? And being able to summarize concisely the reasons the historian has given. Students also often find it difficult to select quotations that represent that main argument. So this is also something that could be practiced in class. And selecting the key evidence and the main reason for the argument can also be challenging. You could also show students article abstracts as examples of argument summaries and then get them to write their own. And I'm sure there are many ways that you are teaching note-taking. Any ideas, please, that you find successful with your students, please do share into chat for others to see. How do you encourage them to make those notes? And of course, these are great skills for them to be using in preparation for further work or university. So important, these kinds of key skills to be embedded, isn't it? So, and put them into chat, please. What do you do? How do you teach note-taking? Or are there other exercises that you do that in order to encourage students to be thinking about why are there different interpretations? It'd be great if we could share ideas together. I'll give. So I'm going to pause for a minute to give you some time to be putting into chat. What do you do to teach note-taking? What do you do to encourage thinking about interpretations? Oh yes, Laura's tried the Cornell method. It doesn't work for every student. Yeah, I have also used that effectively with some students. That's a great idea. I mean, obviously, we haven't got time to look at that in detail now, but thank you, Laura. Do Google it if others don't know what the Cornell method is, but that can be very effective. Yep, writing frames, models of note-taking, absolutely, yes. Yep, mind maps, can't go wrong with mind maps. Oh, that's interesting. Building blocks, yeah, that the whole idea of Chapman's idea of it being a construction to show how they can build towards their conclusion. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, claims, reasoning, evidence. So there's some really good ideas here. Keyword clouds, that's interesting. I will be talking a bit later on about the importance of glossaries. Thank you for that. Yeah, lots of really good ideas coming. Do keep them going. Now let's think about, in our planning, about resources. And of course, as well as books and articles in your library, you can produce a bank of online resources for students to select from, although of course being sufficient for there to be enough range for students to be having independent research. So they need to have sufficient range to be able to choose. In particular, if students are all doing the same question, a suitable range of works is required for this cohort in order for them to produce individual responses. Because where all students are following the same topic area, they shouldn't, of course, be evaluating the same 3 chapters or articles. They need to be exercising their own judgment in selecting which resources to use and deciding how to use them. And so it's not acceptable for all students in the same cohort to use the same 3 works. Of course, it may be that individual students within a cohort might end up choosing the same 3 works. However, this is where the student's resource record comes in, and we will be looking at that in a moment, because that actually can help to show how the students have independently selected those historians' works. And just again, to reiterate, that they cannot choose as either their 3 works or their supplementaries any passages used by the teacher in the skills-based course of study. All of this can be found in the new A-level history coursework guidance, page 7, which I say will be out next week. So giving them guidance in that short course on how to find additional resources online or from their local libraries, and liaison with the manager of your learning resource centre or library, of course, is crucial here. Perhaps they could come into the classroom to provide some guidance on research skills and the online resources available. And so from their reading, the students are selecting their 3 main historians and at least 2 supplementary works. And the research record is the evidence of that process of them selecting. More of that in just a moment. Can the students have more than 2 supporting works? And yes, they can. They could have 1 supplementary for each of their historians, so 3. I mean, it's up to the students. It's just at least 2 supplementary works. But of course, there'll be other books and articles that they'll be able to bring in as well as part of their the wider contextual knowledge. A bit more of that example of that a bit later on. So we've looked at note-taking, we've looked at the resources, we've looked at introducing why historians have different interpretations. And now let's look at criteria. And remember that the definition of criteria is the basis on which the question is judged. And if you haven't looked at the Edexcel Guide to Criteria, I do recommend it. Of course, students are already familiar with the need to identify and apply criteria in their judgments in papers 1, 2, and 3. And here they're expected to do the same in their assessment of the 3 historians. So having a talk about that and exploring that within the short talk course and in preparation would be great. thinking of relevant questions, making a list together with the students of sorts of questions they might be asking. Does the focus of the historians limit their understanding? Is it balanced or one-sided? What's the time frame? Could you put into chat what other criteria questions might you use when you're looking at these historians? The guide to criteria is on the Pearson site. Hopefully, Mark can put a link into chat for you, Matt. It is a useful guide there. It's called the Edexcel Guide to Criteria. So put into chat, please. Into chat, please. What other criteria questions might they use? This is the kind of thing to do with your students, getting them to compile possible lists of criteria just to get them started and thinking about possible relevant criteria they might find relevant to their historians. The important thing, of course, is once they've come up with these relevant questions, to emphasize how it needs to be customized to their topic. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Do they have a particular political viewpoint? That's a good one. Can we have some other ideas? What else might we think about? We could say, what is their underlying assumption, for instance? Oh, thank you, Angela. Does their work cover the entire period focus of the question? That's a good one. Does it have a wide sweep, or is it particularly focused on a particular time period? What's the extent of their coverage? Yes, what is their focus? Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. Their perspective. What research methods are they using? What is their evidence base? I'm sure you'll be able to come up with quite a wide list with your students there. And remembering, just remind you again of that mark scheme that we looked at, that in level 5, we have valid criteria are established by which the arguments in the 3 chosen works can be judged, and they are applied and fully justified in the process of making judgments. So helping students to identify the kinds of criteria they might apply will really help prepare them here. So in your booklet, there is an excerpt from the exemplar. If you look in the booklet, page 9, have a look at that extract and see if you can identify the criteria that are being used here, please. Just give you a couple of minutes to have a look. It's page 9 of the booklet. What criteria in the excerpt is being used? And here is the exemplar that's in your booklet. And you can see here that the criterion being applied is the type of evidence used. And this criterion has led the student in this example to find Chapeau's interpretation less convincing. So in this particular one, this was relevant to his historian. As the coursework marking training states, whether criteria are relevant will depend on the issue investigated and the nature of the chosen works. But in this example, this is very relevant, the evidence he suggests, which according to the student makes the interpretation less convincing. Let's look at another example. It's same page, look at excerpt 2, and again highlight where the student is applying criteria to assess the 3 historians and what criteria is being used. And these are kind of all exercises that you could do with your students. So in this longer extract, you'll see I've highlighted the relevant area. You can see that the criterion being applied here is the historian's timescales, the scope of their work. It says he looks at history on a much more limited time scale. Shapiro compared to Fiore, who's trying to fit it into a long-term framework for interpretation. And it is useful to show students exemplars from other coursework topics to identify where criterion is being applied and give them ideas of the kind of criteria that might be relevant. And of course, students can apply more than one criterion as relevant in order to decide which of the historian's arguments they find most convincing. Helen's asked, is it perhaps a little bit too full of it may rather than it does? I think it's just the way that this student's been writing about it, because it is clear that they're comparing the two different timescales. And I think later on in the essay, this is also brought up a little bit more clearly, though I do take your point, it could be a bit more confident, couldn't it, perhaps? But nonetheless, you can see that this is a quite clear criteria that's being applied. So, as I say, encouraging students to identify the criteria in different examples, thinking about how they could use more than one, thinking about how they can decide which is the most relevant criteria to use with their particular historians. So now let's move on from the planning to thinking about supporting your students when they're actually identifying their historians, thinking about the historical debate that they're going to be participating in, looking at the different interpretations that they are finding, and then, of course, the wider reading as well. So this exercise is building on work done and assessing historians' extracts in paper 1. Remembering that the three historians must be sufficiently different for the student to be able to make comparisons and judgments, as the coursework guide says. So a diagram such as this could be a way for them to identify what the main arguments are and to discern whether there is sufficient debate between them, summing up in the circles the contrasting arguments. And of course, the way I've put those circles is also to show that it's not necessarily the case that historians have completely polar opposite arguments. Sometimes disagreements can be more nuanced and there can be some common ground. This could be done several times with students until they get the combination of historians they want. At this point, maybe it's worth just saying that of course it's not about the reliability of the historians, which I know some students fall into that trap. It's reliability is assessment objective 2 rather than assessment objective 3. It's more about how convincing the student finds their arguments within the historical debate compared to their own view. If you remember, the generic question asked about what is your view? And the student, you could explain to the student that they are the fourth historian in the room. They're listening to and understanding the three different arguments of the other historians, but bringing in their own view as well. So in chat, could you put in what ways do you use? And here's one example of how to help them compare and select their historians. I wonder what you do that you could share. And Jonathan said, can one criterion be applied throughout? Absolutely. Yeah. Or does it need to be criteria? Actually, sometimes it's more, the student can find it very useful to have more than one. But the important thing is that they are using valid criteria or criterion to judge their historians. Sometimes when you've got three different historians, you might find it's more useful to have more than one, but as long as they are using criteria and applying it, that's what we're looking for. So do put in chat, please, what do you do to help them to understand and discover the historical debate and to choose their three historians? So we've looked at choosing the historians, identifying the debate, making decisions about which historians they will choose, which of course is something they will then write about in the resource record. I'll give you an example of that a bit later. When they're evaluating their different historians, it could be useful to think about the different tone of the historians. The class can make a glossary of different adjectives. You know, is it persuasive? Is it measured? Is it limited? And then think and encouraging them to build in their glossary as they're doing their reading. What adjectives could they think of to describe their historian? Oh, thank you, Helen. I see we've got an example of how you get them to think about the historians. We asked them to write a short summary summarizing the difference of their three works. Yes, that's a nice idea. Thank you. So that they really, I've lost it on the chat now, it goes so quickly. But yeah, that's a really good idea. Just checking that they have understood what the main arguments are, and it's great. Kate, use big sheets of paper where a fact idea is placed at the top, and they add quotes, ideas from their reading to build a particular interpretation. Yeah, lovely. These are all really great ideas on helping them to then choose which historians they are going to select in order to identify the historical debate. Yep, summary of historians, says Michelle, identifying similarities and differences to other works they've read. Yeah, building up the idea of the debate. Lovely, thank you. Some good examples there. So thinking about tone, what other adjectives could they think of? It would be the sort of question you would ask the students, helping them to build up a glossary there. Are they confrontational? Is it insightful? Is it restricted, limited? Those sorts of words can really help them to perhaps be a bit more objective in the way in which they're reading their historians and trying to think of what kinds of arguments they are encountering. So then thinking, now they've got their historians, starting to think about, having built up in the short course about why historians have different interpretations, now they're looking at their historians and trying to think about why do they have different views. One way could be to encourage them to research the biographies of the historians and then to think about, have they been shaped by their experiences of what's happening when they're writing? and getting them to create a timeline, which you could do in class or in groups, of key dates covering the historian's time periods. Could this have been an influence on their selection of evidence or their choice or their judgments? I'm just giving you a short example. Say, if you were doing 20th century historians, I'm sure you'll be able to think of many more things that you could put in a timeline of this nature. And what we're worth saying here, that these reasons for different views are just conjectures. They don't need to prove it is the case, because what they're doing is demonstrating that they've got an awareness of different interpretations and the nature of historical debate, as it says in the mark scheme. So they don't have to prove that they've been influenced, but they could suggest that possibly this is why they've been influenced. So a timeline, that could be one way of thinking about it. Or maybe they could do a pie chart looking at the type of evidence that the historian is doing. They could assess what's the predominant evidence category selected by each historian, and then consider why that might be. So here's an example. You can see here that this historian number one is clearly his predominant evidence is economic. Then start to think about possibly why. Was he writing during or just after the 1929 Wall Street crash, possibly, or the 2007-8 credit crunch? Or what about their previous career path or focus? Had they been an economic advisor in the past? Look at their previous books and articles. Were they economic analysis or histories? Just trying to get students to think about possible ways in which the historian, why they might have selected the evidence that they do. So we've looked at timelines, we've looked at thinking about the timeline and their previous careers, looking at their biographies, looking at their previous written works in order to identify the particular focus or method of the historian. Sometimes it's relevant to think about them being influenced by a particular theory or school of historical thought. For instance, that historian one might agree with Keynes' economic theory that government intervention can stabilize the economy, or subscribe to the late 19th century supply and demand theories of the neoclassical approach, or maybe they're part of the 1950s, 60s Annales school of thought, following Bourdelle and emphasizing the role of large-scale social economic factors in history. But I do need to emphasize here that it's not a requirement. It is not necessary to identify schools of historical thought. Indeed, sometimes it can be counterproductive if such a label is just applied and detracts from the actual views being expressed. However, sometimes it's useful, and if relevant, it would be credited as historical context or be a useful criterion by which to judge the interpretation. But of course, this depends, doesn't it, on the works chosen, and it's not a requirement. So what I've done here, I hope, is given you some suggestions to get students thinking about why historians might have different views and to understand further the nature of historical debate. And they would only select what they deemed relevant to the interpretations that they have. Let's have a look at the exemplar in the booklet. It's page 10 of the booklet. And see if you could highlight, please, explanations within that extract for why they're taking their view. So if you could have a look at that, please. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. It's page 10 of the booklet. Highlight where in the extract they're giving explanations for why the historians are taking their view. So you can see in the first extract, this is where the historian, the student is looking at the historian's focus on political history and is wondering if that's because of his goal of bringing together the disciplines of psychology and history. Like that, there's a sentence further down. Look, Shapiro may have attempted to apply a specific lens when analysing the outcomes of the period, such to fit his psychoanalytical framework about trauma. And then if you look at the second extract, looking at Cobham and Fury's similar political beliefs, interpreting the revolution in a classical liberal fashion. And then you see I've highlighted that Fury advocated the classical liberal view. He came to emulate Cobham's focus on political history. Now, actually, in that particular extract is a good example of the possible pitfalls of referring to schools of thought. In this particular one, the candidate has realised that by this stage in his writing, Fury had rejected the Annales school of thought and Marxist view he held previously. If you look, that's just a few lines down. But other students might not have done sufficient research to know this, and they might erroneously apply this label, even though the evidence selected and consequent view expressed was political rather than social economic. So again, using exemplars such as this with your students, getting them to highlight where reasons for the views have been taking place can again give them ideas for their own work. Also, looking at historians' reviews of other historians' books and articles can be really useful for assessing arguments, but it can also offer possible reasons for their historians' views, and again give students ideas of the kind of explanations they could be offering and the kind of analytical language they might be using. JSTOR, I mean, I've found very useful in the past. I don't know if your school or college subscribes. Also, we've got reviews.history.ac.uk. Please put into chat if there are other resources that you use and find helpful. And in fact, in the exemplar, in support of the argument that Fury may well gloss over detail in order to produce a theory, the student does actually refer to a review. Now you can see here, as pointed out by many when assessing his work, his conceptual approach to history, in which he preferred to overlook minute detail in favour of political and philosophical analysis, and then it's footnoted. The review is footnoted. So that can be helpful. Do put into chat, please, what do you use in order to help students access this kind of historical review? Say JSTOR can be particularly useful, but there's also other ways as well. In fact, you could look out for comments by the historians themselves. Often they write in their own prefaces or introductions and conclusions to their printed work, often, which is nice, explaining what their focus is or their particular method is or their influence. So just providing students with single chapters from a book could miss out on these useful commentaries. So yes, do please put into chat, what have you found that's useful here in order to help students access these kinds of historical analysis and reviews? It'd be useful to share. So now we come to thinking about the supplementaries and wider reading. And a bank of sentences could be useful here to get students thinking about how that additional reading is applied. That's the important thing, isn't it? Applied. So you could start off in class by sharing exemplars from other coursework topics and then asking students themselves to identify helpful sentences from them. Now, here's a few examples, such as, whilst X's focus is more on ... compared to Z's emphasis upon ... his overall judgment is compatible with Z in that. or something more simple. Y offers a similar argument to X, where she argues that. I mean, encouraging students to make their own useful comparative sentences glossary will actually help them become more skilled in their own evaluative writing. So do encourage the students to look out for how the historians themselves that they are reading refer to other historians' work. Through doing that, they become more aware of the type of language that leads to analysis and understand that references to their further reading should link to the historical debate engendered by their three chosen historians. So writing up itself, there's no required structure for the assignment, as long as students present their own view and also analyse the three relevant works. Here's just two examples, but I say there is no actual preferred structure. These both come from the coursework guide. So in one of them, one of the suggestions is that the students find it helpful to have two sections. The first section is when they're looking at the analysis, the explanation, the evaluation of the differing interpretations in their three chosen works, and in the second section, presenting their view. Or another suggested structure is they might prefer to divide the essay into four sections. The first three taking each of the three bullet points in the question. Just a quick reminder of what those three bullet points were. 1, analyse the ways in which interpretations of the question, problem, or issue differ. 2, explain the differences you've identified. And 3, evaluate the arguments indicating which you found most persuasive in explaining your judgments. So that would be the first three sections, and the fourth section is the presentation of their view. Of course, students can divide the assignment into sections or complete it as a continuous essay. There is no required structure. What structures do you advise? Be good to share the different approaches that you take. So as I say, these are just two suggestions that come from the coursework guide, but it's not the preferred way. There is no required structure for the assignment. So if you could put into chat, please, what structure do you advise? So we've thought about the debate, the explanations for their views. We've thought about the note-taking, the reading, the analysing, the writing up. And I have referred at a number of occasions, haven't I, to the resource record. The resource record is where the student lists all the resources they've used. Unlike the bibliography, where they write down what they've actually used and footnoted, the resource record can include background reading that they have done that they haven't particularly quoted or cited in the essay itself. It's all the resources that they've used. And it's really useful for you to be able to check on the research progress and provides you with evidence of the quality of their work. And then what's really useful is that in the comments section, they actually say which they have chosen as their main and which they've chosen as their supplementary historians, and briefly why. So there is that evidence of independent selection. And of course, this shows the moderator that students have made independent choices about which resources to use. And here's an example, which again comes from the exemplar that we've been looking at throughout. And you can see after the explanation of the argument, it says at the bottom, I will use this work as a supplementary work, as it doesn't explore Doyle's argument in a relatively short number of pages, such that I would be comfortable with using it as a core work. But it's useful nonetheless because ... So putting that in the comment to show that they are thinking about which historians they're going to use and why is a really is very useful for you, but also helps the moderator to see that process. Oh, thank you. I can see that we're getting various ideas here about how you encourage writing up. Thank you. Lots of really good ideas coming up onto the chat. Do add your own if you're doing something different to that. But they all look good. Yep. Subheadings. Yep. Fine. All of that can just help them to organize their material. Thank you for those suggestions. So again, looking at past coursework exemplars and looking at examples of their resource record like this, and there is also some other exemplar resource records on the Pearson site, showing them examples that so they can get an idea of the sort of thing that they are being asked to do. And it can be a really useful way of helping them to sift through the different reading that they're doing and deciding what is the main argument. There's little summaries there and how they're going to use them. And it does encourage a discussion with you as they are progressing in their work. As I hope I've been suggesting, there is a lot of support out there for you. There is a lot of resources available for you on the Pearson site. I've already mentioned that this new coursework guide, please look out for that. It is being launched next week, and it does bring together so much of the other resources and guides on coursework that's out there from Pearson. So have a look out for that coming out next week. There are also guidelines on marking coursework, which I know will be coming up not so long, and do have a look at that. They are going to be on the Pearson site at the moment. They are available on YouTube. If you look at the Pearson's account on YouTube, you will find those recordings, but I say they will also be clearly on the site very soon. They have been recorded and are there for you. They were looking under teaching materials. Will the new guidance be in the monthly update email? I'll let Mark answer that. I'm sure that it will be made clear. Yes, I thought that would be the answer. Thank you, Mark. So do look out for it. I have quoted from this new coursework guide as we've gone through. You've also got the Arthur Chapman Abridged Guide to Interpretation, and you've also got all the exemplars that are up there, which you could, as I hope I've explained, you could use profitably with your students. Because just remember, as I said before, any material on the actual coursework topic that you use in the short-term course or in class cannot then be selected by the students. So just be careful about that. But there is so much other material that you could use. If you want to find out more, please have a look at other courses. See our Pearson Professional Development Academy, which will have lots of useful things there for you. So if you would like to find out more about the courses that are on offer. And then, of course, we've already been having Mark in the background very helpfully answering queries and giving you resource links in the chat. And here is his email. And you already referred to the fact of his regular updates. If you haven't signed up for that, I really encourage you to do that. There's also a live chat. So do make use of that. I know that Mark answers promptly and helpfully. So any questions that you have, please do ask there. And if there are any questions that you think about after this presentation has taken place, do email them and then we'll be sure to do our best to answer them. You will also get information next week about the coursework deadlines coming up and all of that information that will be there. So that's again for you to use. And so now that leaves 10 minutes for you to be able to share what coursework topics you do, seeing if there are other schools out there who would like to share ideas and resources with you. So I'll give you some time now to go on to the chat to share that and any other ideas. There's been some great ideas this session, so thank you for that. Do have a look through the chat later. I will also now look and see if there's any questions that I haven't answered yet or any questions that you can put onto chat. So I'm going to give you about 5-6 minutes now to share on the chat what coursework topics you do and whether you would like to make links with others, what other ideas that you've been using effectively. Thank you. And I'll just have a look through and see if there's any questions. And in case it's been lost in amongst all the chat, Maria is saying, does anyone do a question on the American Civil Rights Movement, Russian Revolution, 1917? If so, what questions do you use? Because we're new to this. So if anyone is doing it there, if you could respond to Maria, that would be great. Either you can respond to her directly or put it in the chat for everyone. So thanks for that question, Maria. So do share, what coursework topics do you teach? Any other questions you have? Any networking or sharing of ideas and resources that you would like to do? Just got a few more minutes to do that. Yes, as I said, there will be marking training videos on the subject page very soon. There'll be a series of recordings available to you, but they are already on YouTube. I hope you found this useful. Thank you for your time after a busy day today, and I wish you all the best with you and your students as you now continue with your coursework. So we'll leave the chat open just a little bit longer, as I know people are still putting in comments, but thank you very much, and I wish you well. You're welcome.